Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the weekly MMA Cycles Market Update. Today is the 1st of May, 2024. This is Gianni DePoce, your host, and I'm joined this week by our very own Pouyan Zolfagharnia from the UK. Pouyan, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Johnny. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you back, and I know many of our viewers are excited to have you on the show as well. Let's jump right into it. I'll start off by sharing my screen. You and I can, talk about markets for a long time, and there's no shortage of things to talk about today. So let's start off with stocks. We're on the defensive here. May have completed another lower high. We're not, in full-blown panic mode just yet, but we are in this reversal zone. Venus just moved into Taurus. Mars just moved into Aries. We have Pluto retrograde coming up later this week. So what's your take on what's going on in stocks? And do we need to be careful, or should we be a little more courageous now, do you think?
My bias is towards the equity markets having bottomed around the 19th of April. So I think we're getting double bottom to that. And I'm hoping that's where the primary cycle trough is. So I've been a little bit more bullish and trying to re-enter positions since that date. And looking at the long-term charts, I think that my only concern was, I know we are due to get a long-term 18-year cycle crest at some point in the equity markets, so at some point this year. And looking at some of those long-term charts, I just felt we are hitting some resistance. And if the primary cycle is forming now, I'm sure it will rally into the summer months, potentially even as far as autumn. But I would urge some caution around those.
Yeah, well, I'm most curious about your position on the 18-year cycle. We are late, no doubt about it. The last 18-year low in 2009. So we're getting up into that. And near term, we're due for a 4-year cycle to culminate. My concern, Pouyan, is that you had this 2-week corrective rally basically out of that low from the 19th, which, by the way, was the day before Jupiter conjunct Uranus. So given how late we are in this 4-year cycle, my concern is if we take out this low, well, I guess in the Dow here it was the 17th, but in the NASDAQ it was the 19th. So
Yeah.
but if we take out that low, to me, that's what we need to be really careful about, because you would expect at least one bearish primary cycle going into a long-term 4-year cycle bottom. On that note, let's jump over to the NASDAQ, because the NASDAQ is down today, kind of leading to the downside. You can see here that it really led out of that low, which I thought was a good sign. Usually seeing the NASDAQ lead, you had that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, Uranus rules technology. It was looking good, but it almost looks like a retest of former support turn resistance, potential lower high. So I'm about 50-50 on stocks right now. We could get one more blow off top, I think, but I'm with you on the importance of that low from April. If we take that out to the downside, I don't know, maybe we do get that 18-year cycle, like you say. Anything geocosmically that could trigger that from your vantage point?
Well, looking at the geocosmics, the fact that we got the highs just before that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that you alluded to, I would say that's timely, just purely using the geocosmics around that. And I completely agree, especially on the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones. When you look at it, the primary cycle may have started as early as February, I think 21st of February it was for NASDAQ.
Oh, yeah.
So that could have been the primary cycle, which has already turned bearish. You get a similar outlook on the Dow Jones as well. In which case, then the price targets are going to be much lower for both markets. Looking at the mundane picture, I was trying to understand what could be causing the markets to top out. My expectations were that they would top out some point during 2024. It'll be going through Ray's book. I think he said, look, we should be rallying into the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and that momentum might continue into the Jupiter-Saturn square, the waxing square that's going to be forming later on in the summer. And then the momentum might change. So I based my trading strategy around that, and I'm continuing with that at the moment. So that's why I'm hoping the primary cycle is just formed on April 19th. And I was trying to use the astrology to see what could happen in the near future. What could cause a sell-off into that 18-year cycle low? And there are a lot of war signatures that we can point at. Again, Ray has highlighted a load of those within his 2024 forecast book. But it was interesting that we had the solar eclipse happening on April 8th in Aries.
Aries, yeah.
It was 19 degrees of Aries, where you've got the sun in its degree of exaltation. Yeah. And there was a lot of mundane activity around that period, leading into the eclipse and straight afterwards. And I'm always interested in using astrology, not only to forecast the events and the timing of the events, but also to see if there's a way of identifying where those events might occur in the world. And whenever I looked at in the past, I've always followed the eclipse path. So you've got the eclipse path that was going across the US on this most recent eclipse.
Yeah, I saw it. I was just outside the main zone, actually.
Yeah. And then I think we had a small earthquake in New York.
Which is highly unusual. Yeah,
just before the eclipse took place.
Yeah.
But another interesting research I've done is looking at the spring ingresses. I know Persian astrologers used to spend a lot of time looking at those spring ingress charts to try to forecast events for the whole year. You can use all the seasonal ingresses, but they specifically focus on the spring one. And one of the interesting things I found was the region that's highlighted by the spring ingress. So if you look at the astrocartography chart, where you've got the sun right on the MC, and sometimes it can be on the cardinal points, but usually the MC point, that region of the Earth, is usually highlighted for events for that year. And this year that took place over Japan, all the way down to Australia. So when I immediately looked at it, before events started to take place in the Middle East, I thought, well, the obvious points of tension would be the South China Sea and maybe North Korea, that sort of region I had in the back of my mind. Interestingly, on that chart, you've also got the sun right on the ascendant. So it was rising at the point of the spring equinox across the Middle East. So we did see some events around that period take place between Israel and Iran, but it's not always that obvious. So I'm still looking at that South China Sea area. We've had several earthquakes. We had a big one in Taiwan, one in Japan. We've all over the world we're getting flooding with Saturn in Pisces, but specifically in that region we've had a couple of big major flooding events. We had the knife attacks in Australia. So I'm keeping a close eye in that region, and if we get something big enough occurring in that region of the world, that might then correlate to why we're getting a crest formation in the equity markets at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's all very pertinent. And I want to jump over to the crypto market real quick and look at Bitcoin, because I know it's something that you track very closely as well. You're seeing some major selling here in Bitcoin, dropping to new lows, the lowest level since the end of February. And I know Ray's issued a couple of special reports on this over the last couple of weeks, because it's a big move taking place. I'm a little more cautious. You know, once we had this low on the 19th, I was a little optimistic because that was a little bit before the halving. You had Jupiter conjunct Uranus, but this is not a good breakdown. And if you go back and look the last couple times that Bitcoin completed 15-month lows, it did correlate with stock sell-offs too. So I'm a little cautious now. I don't know if there's anything from a geocosmic standpoint you're watching with respect to crypto. But I do think the decline is near its end. You might get another, $5,000 to $10,000 decline. And I think it'll be a buying opportunity. But I do think that there's going to be a little bit more selling near term. So what's your take on what's happening in crypto? And then we can talk about metals, because I know you're a specialist in
Sure.
that as well.
I completely agree with what you just said. We both, all the markets we're tracking look quite bearish at the moment. They're all dropping into either a primary cycle bottom, a longer term cycle bottom, as we are seeing in the cryptos, or maybe a half primary cycle bottom, as we're seeing in the metals. Now, looking at Bitcoin by itself, and I think you've highlighted this in your weekly reports, it depends on which one of the counts you're taking as to whether the primary bottom occurred, I think it was around September last year, or whether it's occurred in January of this year. And the significance of that will be, well, which one of the price targets have we dropped into? If you take the January one, we're right in there at the moment. So it's a great buying opportunity, especially as an intermediate cycle is forming. And out of all the assets that I track and trade, I would say I'm most bullish about Bitcoin and the crypto market. Looking at the technicals on the chart, I think there's still plenty of room left for it to grow. Cyclically, I think it's still early on in the cycles. And whilst we could have a left translation, which we haven't seen yet in the past, it could happen. So you always have to be prepared for the worst case scenario as well. But if we don't get that, and again, my bias is that we won't get that, especially with what we just discussed around the geopolitics of the world. I appreciate cryptos are the highest risk asset class, but at the same time, Bitcoin itself is trying to become a digital form of gold. So it aspires to becoming a safe haven asset at some point in its life. It's not there yet with $10,000 price oscillations in a single day. So
not enough stability for sure.
But as it is starting to grow as an asset class, as we have the ETF in place now, and you've got more money flowing into Bitcoins, I think that will take place over time.
Yeah. Let's jump over to gold. I'm going to use GLD, the ETF, so we have the intraday price action. I thought we might have completed the major cycle low last week, but now, we're still in that time band where it could be completed. It may have been completed yesterday. So I think we're either in or on the cusp of the final phase in this primary cycle. Gold has obviously made new all-time highs. I still think there's a lot of value to be had on a relative basis in silver. But what's your take on what's going on in precious metals? And do you think gold can make another new all-time high before it really tops out? And what do you think of silver? Do you think silver could finally break that 30 level?
I'm a little bit more bearish, especially on silver in comparison to gold. And just because of this cyclical counts and the intermediate cycles that are coming up in silver. Not so much gold. Gold is very early on in its longer term cycles and does have a lot of room to grow. Again, the geopolitical tension, if it does unfold as we see it, it's only going to help gold go higher. When I was looking at the intermediate cycles in gold, they don't tend to top out this early when a new cycle is started. I think November 22 was when the cycle bottomed, and I think there's still room for gold to grow. Now, that being said, and we're only halfway through, I think, the primary cycle. We saw a similar layout in the previous primary cycle, where peaked, and the primary cycle crest was formed pretty much, I think, week 9 on December 4th. And it wasn't able to really take that out until the new primary cycle started. We may see something similar in this primary cycle. I know it's bullish. It's already taken out the crest of the previous cycle, but we still haven't seen it form a new high after Tuesday of week 9. So because I'm so bearish on silver, it kind of, and gold always has to lead the way. So it makes me a little bit more cautious with what's happening in gold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you are late in the primary cycle, so that's the biggest headwind. But I've noted this in past videos, Pouyan, how the biggest thing for me that I've noticed with precious metals is how they've started rallying even with bonds selling off and interest rates going higher. That wasn't the case for a long time. It seems like they always did better when interest rates were coming down. And now that we're seeing the opposite of that, it tells me that there's a real global demand for precious metals, probably due to the geopolitical tensions like you've mentioned. So that's definitely on my radar. I want to talk about crude oil too with you, since I know you cover that market very closely.
Sure.
Here's the most important question with crude oil, Pouyan. We just had Mars conjunct Neptune 2 days ago in the 29th degree of Pisces. Primary cycle low complete, or do you think we're still in the older primary cycle?
I think it might be forming today. So all the alarms I had were firing off. The only reservation I have is, since I've been tracking crude oil, whenever a primary cycle forms, not always, but in the majority of cases, you do get bullish oscillator divergence on the CCI. It seems to work really, really well. And we haven't had that yet. And that's the only thing that's kind of giving me a signal that it might still drop a little bit more. At the same time, we still haven't had any big geopolitical events either. I think it's been dropping at the moment because there's potential for peace talks between Israel and Hamas, which would be great. But there's going to be a trigger event that I'm looking for around the 26th of May, give or take 3 or 4 days either side.
That's the day after Jupiter goes into Gemini, right?
Yes, exactly. I think Jupiter goes into Gemini on the 26th.
25th May, 25th, 26th, depending on time.
It depends on location. You're right. And on the same day, or just before it, Mars will be transiting the solar eclipse degree, that 19 degrees of Aries.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's going to be important because Mars ruled the eclipse too.
Yeah. Wow. And it usually releases a lot of energy. And it can be explosive, which is then very dangerous when it comes to geopolitics. And it's too far out for the primary cycle to form, but the primary cycle may form before that, and then we get an event which will then really send oil rallying. So I'm very bullish on crude oil.
Fantastic. Well, Pouyan, that's all the time that we have to go through charts today. Any final thoughts, comments, anything on your mind, astrological related? Any other markets that you think we should be on the lookout for, and just final comments before we wrap it up?
Sure. So as we alluded to, you got Jupiter changing signs, and I always try to look at the sign that it's going into, and look at buying opportunities for assets that might relate to it. So over the past few weeks, I was tracking Tesla. Because it has been underperforming, and we were coming into a primary cycle trough on the NASDAQ. So I was speaking to a couple of friends, and I was saying that if you look at the long-term chart for Tesla, it was hitting a long-term support trend line. It's an ascending trend line going back to 2019, or even further back. If you draw a trend line, you can see it was getting pretty close to it, and it seemed to be, maybe it was in 2019, from the 2019 to the 2021. That's it. So it was getting close to that mark, and I thought, it seems like a good buying opportunity because Gemini rules cars,
Yeah.
And the other planet we've got going into Gemini over the next few years will be Uranus,
Yeah.
and that rules electricity. So this is one stock that I really like. Not only is it electrical cars, it incorporates the AI element and the
Right.
whole innovative elements
It's all going to be
of
trying Pluto
stocks.
to Aquarius too, so that's important.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 So this was one of the stocks that I started to buy into when that low was occurring, and within 5 trading days, it's rallied about 43%.
Yeah.
So that was that's one stock that I'm watching. There's also a downward trend line coming across from when the all-time high was made, and I would say that would be a great opportunity for profit taking once it starts to approach that.
Yeah, so you might see a rally to 220, 240 before you start to see some real selling pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Very good. Well, Pouyan, thanks again so much for joining me. Everyone, if you liked what Pouyan had to share here today, I know that I did. He will be a featured speaker at the MMA Investment Retreat in Slovenia in Lake Bled from the 19th of September to the 22nd of September. So I'd highly recommend that you check out the details of that conference. It can be found at www.mmacycles.com. Not only that, Pouyan, but you have your monthly addendum report that you publish at the end of each month. So
Yes.
any updates you want to share on that report, or is everything going smoothly?
No, I think I've pretty much shared most of my outlooks as we've been going through each one of the markets. But yeah, the next report should be coming out at the end of May.
Beautiful. So that's supplemental to the monthly cycles report, a separate issue, but a very nice publication with a lot of graphics and geocosmic illustrations. So would highly recommend you check that out because it definitely is one of our more popular reports here at MMA. So Pouyan, thanks again for joining me. That's all for now. We'll have you back probably one more time before the conference. That's my goal. And otherwise, that's when I'll see you next. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.